Today's daf is daf lamed beis Bava Metziah. We're going to begin by the Mishnah Mitzvah Berefus. Okay. So the Mishnah Mitzvah Berefus, if one found an animal in a stable, he found this animal in a stable belonging to his owners. So the halacha is ein chayav bam. He's not obligated to return it to its owner. Now, so that's the word. So Mitzvah Berefus, if you found an animal in the stable, so then ein chayav, but he's not obligated to return it to his owner. We'll explain what that means. If he found an animal in Rishus Rabim, then the chayav, he's obligated to return it to the owner. If an animal was lost in a graveyard in a Beis HaKvaros and a kohen found it, so the halacha is lo yitam. He does not become tummy to return either a mitzvah say to Hashavas Aveda. There's also a leisa say not for a kohen not to be tummy. So Beis HaKvaros lo yitam. If his father said to him, become tamei, the kohen's father said to become tamei, or somebody else told him, or another, let's say somebody told him, not a kohen, another father tells Yisrael, al tachzer, do not return it. Allah is la you should not listen to him because he's violating the Teda. There's a kibbut of aim, but not when it violates the Teda. Now, parak vitan, if one unloaded a masa burden from an animal collapsing under its weight, and then later parak he unloaded it, and then vitan, and then later loaded it into the animal, onto the animal, parak vitan, and later unloaded it again. I feel even in a scenario where it repeats 4 or 5 times, chayav is obligated to continue unloading and loading it. Shenemar, as it says, oziv tazir, you shall release it with him, right? Even several times. So halach v'yashav, because the owner went and sat and said to the passerby, since there's a mitzvah incumbent upon you the Torah says that you have to unload the burden. So if you wish to unload the burden, unload it. But I'm not going to help you. The halacha is pater. Why is he bothered? Because it says, you should release it with him, with the owner of the animal.
So you want you to work and get out.
Now, if the failure of the owner to participate in unloading the burden was due to the fact that he was old or he was sick, then the passerby is obligated to unload the burden alone. Now, and then where does it explain what that means? There's a mitzvah minatera to unload the burden, but there's no mitzvah to load it. Shimon says, no, there's even a mitzvah to load the burden. Basically he says, if there was a burden upon the animal greater than his typical burden, one does not need to attend to it. As the Torah says, tachas masay, under its burden, which means that there's an obligation with regard to a burden that the animal can bear. This is just a recap of the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, if a person had found an animal in his owner's stable, so there's no mitzvah to go return it to him because it's obviously it belongs to the owner. If he found an animal or shusarabin, so then he has to go ahead and machras it to try to find the owner. If the animal was in a Beis HaKvaros, so then Allah is, and he's a kohen, so there's no mitzvah, then he should not be metamer. If the father tells him, there's a kohen, go be metamer, or the father tells him, don't return it, Allah is, do not listen to your father. One should not listen to his father. If he's unloading the burden, and then he unloaded it, and each time he collapsed. So even 4 or 5 times, Allah is chayiv to help him, like it says, Azib Tazid. If the guy sits on the side and says, it's a mitzvah minateh, you should help me, and I'm going to sit on the side, so Allah is, he's pater. As the Torah says, imay. If it was a zap and a failure, then he's chayiv. Mitzvah state. You're just saying, general. Yeah. If I see in your rishus, I leave it alone. Don't do anything. There's no. Don't start making this. Don't start making achrozes that we assume that it belongs to the owner. So Fash is a pshat. What does it say there? No door in the bank. Okay, now it's a mitzvah minateh to unload the burden, but there's no mitzvah to load the burden. Shema says, basically says, if there was a burden upon the animal greater than the typical burden, then the halacha is he does not need to attend it. As it says, others burden, in other words, it has to be a burden that the animal can bear. You can't go put on a ton, something the animal can handle, and say, you have to help me. Okay, the Mishnah teaches that if one found an animal in a stable, so he need not return it to its owner. That's what the Mishnah said. So Amar Rabba said, the stable that the Chachamim mentioned, the stable that the Chachamim mentioned in the Mishnah is one that neither encourages the animal to stray, which means it's not 100% open, but also it's not secure. It doesn't secure the animal so they'll not flee. I think Gemara explains what Rabba means. We say that it does not encourage the animal to stray. Why? How do we know that? For the fact that the Tana teaches he's not obligated to return it. And the fact that it's not secure, what do we mean? The fact that it was necessary for the Tana to teach, he's not obligated in its return. Now, the Gemara continues its explanation in Rabba's statement. So, if it enters your mind to say that it is a stable, that if it enters your mind to say that it is a stable that secures the animal, now, why? In a case where one found the animal outside a stable, so Allah he brings it inside a stable of that type, and thereby returns it the animal to his owner. So in the case that he found the animal inside the stable, is it necessary to teach that he's obligated to return it to the owner? Obviously, don't do anything with it. No, rather, learn from here, talking about a case that the stable mentioned in the Mishnah is not secure, does not secure the animal, and thereby there's a possibility that one has to return it. Therefore, we learn from here that if a stable is neither encourages the animal to stray nor secures the animal, you don't do anything with it. Mishnah teaches if one found an animal in a stable belonging to his owner, is not obligated to return it. Yisrael says Allah is only in the case where the animal is standing within the city limits. So the Gemara says you can learn from here that you learn from here that if an animal was found in a public area, he's obligated to return it. Even if it was in the city limits, he's also obligated to return it. So the Gemara says, there are those who teach a statement with regards to the latter clause in the Mishnah. If he found that in Rosh Hashanah, he's obligated to return it. The Allah is a case where the animal is standing beyond the city limits. We'll learn from here that learn from here that in a case where the animal was found in a stable, even if the animal is standing beyond the tchum, he's also not obligated to return it. He's not obligated in its return. Mishnah says, if an animal was lost in a basic forest in a graveyard, or was found by a payin, he may not become tamei to return it. Now, in a case where a kohen's father said to him, become tamei, or in a case where one was obligated to return the animal and the father said, do not return it, the Mishnah said he may not listen to his father. How do we know that he should not listen to him? As it says, it says, every man shall fear his mother and his father, and you shall observe my Shabbos, I am Hashem. What does that mean? It says, you, parents and child, are obligated in my honor. Therefore, if a parent commands a child to refrain from observing a mitzvah, he must not obey the command. Gemara says, what's the reason that a kohen was not obey his father's command to become tamei? It's because the Torah writes, you shall observe my sheteda alav late. Without this saying of Vani Hashem or I would think you're allowed of Amaya Asay, Valesa say. L'cheda, one is an Asay, one is the Lesa say, and we know the din is V'lo Asay, Daf Lesa say, Asay, and Asay cannot come a Deja and Asay and a Lesa say. So why do I need to have this pasuk? Mar says, I need to have the pasuk of Hashem says Dishmeida Ani Hashem, the Soka that I would think. Since honoring one's father and mother is equated to the honor of the Eibishter, Shenemar Kan says over here, Kabbalah Sevicha Basimecha. Says over here, honor your father and your mother. And it says, Hashem Kabbalah Hashem Necha, honor your Hashem from your wealth. Hilkach, late is late. Therefore, one would think that the Kohen has to obey his father's command to become tummy. He's like the Eibishter. Therefore, the Torah teaches us that the Kohen is commanding not to listen to. What's the famous joke? The guy says, the Eibishter wird helfen, the Eibishter wird helfen. Father asks him, wie geht der Machen Parnassam? Eibishter wird helfen. So his father turns to his friend and says, he thinks I'm the Eibishter. Okay. Mitzvah minateda lifrek avalei litin. There's a mitzvah minateda to unload a burden.
Because there are places where you're allowed to be called, you're allowed to do license like paraduma. You become tummy in order to make a.
Why is that license saying?
You are becoming tummy, or breaking Shabbos to do a bris. There are
right, but that's
why it has to be more obvious here that there are places where you might think that the father, if you make that connection, that your father's like it.
Like what?
Not like the Dem. I said everyone. Your parents also don't.
Right.
Parents can't tell you to be mechal something and remind you to do it.
Yeah. Fine. The Mishnah said, "Mitzvah minatera lifrek avalei litin." There's a mitzvah by Torah law to unload a burden, but there's no mitzvah to load the burden. My avalei litin. What does the Mishnah mean by saying, but there's no mitzvah to load it? Ilem avalei litin klal. If we say it means there's no mitzvah to load it at all, ma'ishna prika. So what is the difference about unloading? With regards to which it says you shall release it with him. With regards to loading it as well, the Teda says you're saying why? The Teda says hakim talking light you shall lift up with him. Ella rather where it says what the Mishnah means to say mitzvah lifrek b'chinim. There's a mitzvah to unload the burden for free, but there's no mitzvah to load it for free. Rather, it's a mitzvah to perform for the suffer. Help him. Want to go ahead and put him back in the stress? That you can charge. Shimon says no. Af litin b'chinam. The Teda means that you load it for free. We learn from the Mishnah which the Chum taught in a brisa. Trika b'chinam, tika b'sachar. Both are now. What is the reason of the Pin Chachamim that there's a distinction between unloading and loading with regards to pay? He says, if it enters your mind, and according to the opinion of Shimon, let the Torah write only the mitzvah of loading, and we not need to write the mitzvah of unloading. Well, I would say, just as with regards to loading, where there's no potential suffering of animals, and there's no potential monetary loss to the owner. Chayiv, nevertheless, is chayiv. So prika, these be tzar b'alasayim of a certain case. By prika, where the for sure is going to be at tzar b'alasayim of a certain case. Like also again, does not make sense that the Torah would obligate you to pay. If so, rather with regards to what Allah did the Torah write the mitzvah of unloading, I'm to tell you no prika v'chinam that in regard to unloading the burden and that is free. Tina b'sachar, but with regard to loading is performed with star. And according to Rishim who holds that even loading is performed for free. My time, what's the reason that the Torah writes the mitzvah of unloading? The answer is because the pasuk are not clearly defined. It's unclear which of the pasukim refers to loading and which refers to unloading. Had the Torah written one pasuk, it would have been interpreted to regards to unloading, and there would be no mucker that one need to load or an animal. Why does Rav Shimon say that the pasukim were not clearly defined? Here it's written collapsed under its burden. And there it's written fallen down by the way. Which is mashma that both the animal and the burden are lying on the way and are in need of the loading. It's mashma on the way. But Rav Shimon says Shimon explains that the pasukim were not defined because falling down by the way could be understood as indicating that the animals are following with their burden upon them and referring to unload. Amar Rava says for the statement of both the Tanakh we can learn that Tzar B'Alei is a Torah law. And even Rav Shimon disagree with the opinion of Chacham only with the Psukim because the Psukim are not defined. But had the Psukim been totally defined, we don't have learned the same thing from a Kal V'chemer. Due to the fact there can be learned that the Tzar B'Alei is very nice. The Gemara says, perhaps the Kal V'chemer is due to the fact that there is a factor of monetary loss in unloading and not in loading. This is what the Chachamim are saying. If in the case of loading, or one fails to assist the owner, there is no potential monetary loss. One is obligated to help load the animal. In the case of unloading, where if one fails to assist the owner, there is potential monetary loss. Is it not the more so clear that one is required to unload the burden? But there's no potential monetary loss in loading. Are we not also dealing with a case where in the meanwhile, while the owner waits for assistance, he will be prevented from bringing his merchandise to the marketplace to sell it? Alternatively, Gandavim, thieves, might come and take all the merchandise that's there with him. So therefore, no Kal V'chemer can be learned on the basis of Chasar and Kis. So it must be that it's referring to Tzar B'Lasayim. The Gemara adds another additional proof. Know that the requirement to the requirement to prevent suffering to animals is Midoy Daisa. Tani Seipa was taught in the later positive Mishnah. Basically says, if there was a burden upon an animal greater than the typical burden, one need not attend it. As the Torah says, Tachas Masai, as the Torah says, under its burden, which means a burden that he can handle. We learn from here that the first time it holds that he must attend to unload a burden that is greater than a typical burden. In my time, it must be because suffering animals is a Torah law. So the Gemara rejects the proof and says, perhaps it's with regard to the meaning of the phrase under his burden that they disagree. We do hold Tachas Masai, which means Masai Shechalamayit, but we do not interpret the phrase under his burden of the matter. Now, the Gemara cites an additional rule. To take the Tzar B'Lacham Avdei Raisa, know that the requirement to prevent suffering animals is not Videi Raisa, the Lav Dei Raisa. Not Reisha, because it was taught in the Reisha, all V'yashav Leiv, Amalei, Vadacham Tzalivrik, Break, Potter. Since there's a mitzvah coming upon you to unload the burden, unload it, the passerby is Potter, Break, Potter, Shnemar, Imai, Tzar B'Lacham Avdei Raisa. If you hold the Tzar B'Lacham Avdei Raisa, so Mali is the about the Mali less than about the. Who cares if the owner's helping you or not? The mitzvah is Tzar B'Lacham. It's about the animal. It's not about the owner. So the Gemara says no. Tzar B'Lacham Avdei Raisa. I can really tell you that suffering animals is Avdei Raisa. Yisavas Potter the Gamri doesn't mean that the guy is totally exempt. Maybe he says no, I'll do it, but you have to pay me for it. This is what the Torah says. Whether the owner is there, okay, do it for free. If the owner doesn't want to help, so you can charge for it. Okay, now the Gemara presents it's called a Siman Mnemonic, where a series of proposed proofs citing for the Gemara. And this Siman is Behemas Oyev Seder After. Let us say that the Brisa supports Rabbi's opinion that the requirement to prevent Tzar B'Lacham is Deiraisa. Why? One encounters the animals of a guy collapsing under its burden, he tends to unloads its burden as it will be a Yiddish animal. Now, if you say that the requirement to prevent suffering to animals is Deiraisa, that's why you have to tend to a Goyish animal as a Yiddish animal. But if you say that the requirement to prevent Tzar B'Lacham is not Deiraisa, why does he tend to it as he would tend to the animal of a Yid? Must be Deiraisa. The Gemara says no. Also, there, the reason why one tends to a Goyish animal as a Yiddish animal is because of we don't want to cause Kilashim and strife and enmity that would arise if the Goyim would see that you are not helping. Could he do it when he don't go first? And then he got trouble. Stop, and it's dawned upon me. I don't know. It's question. What does it mean? Hide to get that? What does it mean? Hide to get that? You see a masa, you see something helping him. You see a guy, his car is stuck on the side of the river. Pull him over. It's a mitzvah Deiraisa. It's reasonable to explain the brisa this matter. The Tani, the another brisa. If the animal of a goy was loaded with wine used for yayin esech, so the halacha is an animal collapsed under his burden. Halacha is ein zakuk le, he does not attend. Now, if you say that the requirement to prevent Tzar B'Lacham is not deiraisa, that's what the Torah says. Do not attend to it. The Yamas Zeraisa, but if you say that the obligation is Zeraisa, Mayin's of Allah, why does he attend it? Why do you not attend it? Is an animal suffering? And for the Gemara, this is what the Tana means to say. The Gemara answers that, and to load the animal with wine used for Rabbi Zara, that he does not attend it. Loading an animal does not alleviate its suffering. And the refusal for Rabbi Yid to handle Gayin Nesach will not cause Eva, because he can explain that his religion, and he can say that my religion precludes him from handling these materials. Okay, next thing. Come and learn the rise to Bava Metziah Yisrael. One encounters the animal of a goyish collapsed under the burden of a Yid. So the halacha is he may refuse to unload the burden. As the Torah says, "V'chadalta you shall forgo." Now, why could you forgo it? You have to help him. Or it says like this: then I can tell you that and over there we're talking about awesome. They're talking about loading. If so, you must save it. Look at the sefer. It says the animal of a yid collapsed under the burden of a guy is written as a tazmi. And if the price is a loading, why does the price of Yisrael release it? The Gemara says, because the case is suffering of a yid was delayed while waiting for the animal to be loaded. If so, that the law should be the same. Even the first clause. Why is it no requirement to prevent the suffering of a Jewish partner in that case? So the Gemara says, the rule of the first clause is stated with regards to a Gentile donkey driver, and the Jewish owner of the burden is absent. The rule of the latter clause is referring to a Jewish donkey driver, and one is obligated to prevent the suffering. My Pasakta, on what basis did you arrive to this assertion that the animal of a Yid is driven by a Yid, and the animal of a Goy is driven by a Goy? So my answer is, the typical state of matters is that a person only follows his donkey. The first clause addresses the case of a Goyish donkey. So we say it's the driver's donkey, the Goyish donkey, the driver's Goy. The latter clause addresses the case of a good Jew's donkey. So we presume that who's the driver is a Yid. They didn't have Uber in those days. But isn't the passing of unloading the phrase, you shall forgo, and talking about Beprika? Amalei, Almani, who's that? That they said, well, Doshma, come in here, approve for the price. Oh, you have lifting with Saint Elitin. One encounters a friend whose animal collapsed, and it's necessary to unload his burden. And one encounters an enemy who needs the assistance to lower the burden on the animal. Mitzvah b'seinei, the mitzvah is to assist the enemy. The lochta v'sitcha in order to subjugate one's evil inclination. So the diet of tzar b'lachan deraisa, and if it enters your mind that the requirement to prevent suffering by animals is deraisa or divlay, that option to unload his friend's animal is preferable to course of action for him. Even so, the halacha v'sitcha audit, in order to subjugate his yitzhar, is preferable. And that's the last thing. Tashma seinish amro. Actually, we'll go to the Mishnah. Seinish amro, seinish sol, seinish muslim. The enemy with regards to which, right? There's a Mishnah there. There's a Mishnah right, that's done. Seinish amro, seinish sol, seinish muslim. The enemy with regards, we said, is a Jewish enemy, not a goy. Now, yeah, if it's sarba l'chaim, so what's the difference between the two? In either case, failure to unload the burden will cause the animal suffering. So my answer says, "Me suffers a sin of the prokei." You maintain that the reference of the brisa is the enemy applies to the enemy mentioned in the pasuk. I say the maslizakoi applies to the enemy mentioned in the brisa, in which the Tana taught that loading a burden onto the enemy's animal is preferable to unloading a burden from a friend's animal. Tashma, come and bring a. Yeah, we'll go to the Mishnah. Tashma, Revis related after. Taylor says collapse, but not collapser. Revis related. Takas masay related befried. What difference does it make to me if the animal collapsed? If it's a habitual collapse, and it's hard by the time there, you have to go always listen. Huh?
What's the difference in Buddha?
Ravitz means collapse, but not the one who's a collapser. He's a.
What? Are you talking about the owner? That's who's laying on the owner?
He's an habitual bit of behavior. The animal, yeah, the behemoth. Okay.
In other words, it's on the right to stop at authority or what?
No, the Brisa says, Ravitz, or the Torah says, collapse related after, but not somebody he collapses because he regularly. This is what he does. He collapses, stomachs because he's sick. Yeah.
Why did he collapse regularly? Because he be loaded.
No, because he's a weak behemoth. Anyway, the point is that if it's deiraisa, so there's no difference. So the Gemara says, "Aman basically the Mitzvah balachad rabban." Haram nistar b'tani tachas masay says under his burden masay sheyochal lamed bay. Now, which means a burden that he can handle. Man shavas le'dislei haisvara. Who did he hear that holds to this reasoning? V'yisegli shma mino. So he says, "We matzes mukam mukmos leiter of Yisegli, and can you establish the price according to the opinion of Rabbi Yisegli? Well, then he say v'tachas masay. But isn't it taught later place under his burden? Blame my favorite." But now where it's unloaded. My limit fair, what does it mean when it's unloaded? Elam limit fair, Klavi said to me as though it doesn't go at all, Oxyvocantably. A pit limit fair, Bishkin, a little bit soccer. Masham was like Eastly High Spur, Rabbanon. Gemara says, Elam, Bettina, some of the Rabbanon. When it comes to loading, he holds in accordance to the Chacham. Rabbanon, you see that? Well, there says, if you see a donkey, I would think that one is obligated, even if he sees the animal from a distance. That's what the Torah says, if you encounter. It says, if you encounter, I would think that actual encounter. That's what the Torah says, if you see. And what is saying that there's an element of encounter? It's 7.5 portions, 2/15 of a meal. And this is last thing, Tana, Sana Brisa. After loading the burden onto the animal, when walks with him, parsa to ensure that the burden will not fall again. And he can take start if he wants.